blood betrayal, and a mistranslated sentence that could ignite a violent gang war. What happens when a desperate Omega waiter eavesdrops on a deadly Mafia negotiation only to realize the Alpha boss's trusted translator is leading him straight into a massacre? One whispered, "Warning is about to change everything." Heavy rainfall battered the frosted glass windows of the Obsidian Room, an ultra-exclusive underground dining club nestled deep within Chicago's Gold Coast. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, steeped in the sharp, peppery pheromones of powerful men who made their living through violence. Leo Collins stood near the heavy mahogany doors of VIP Suite B, a polished silver tray balanced perfectly on his fingertips. As an Omega, working in a high society establishment, his life was a delicate, dangerous balancing act. His natural scent, a soft, inviting blend of vanilla bean and rain-soaked earth, was buried under military-grade suppressants. The pills prescribed off the books by a sympathetic doctor at Northwestern Memorial Hospital left him nauseous and prone to migraines, but they kept him employed. More importantly, they kept him invisible. In a world ruled by aggressive alphas, an unbonded Omega was either a target or a liability. Leo could afford to be neither, not with the crippling Cook County property taxes threatening to rip his childhood home from his hands. Tonight, his invisibility was tested. The suite was occupied by two opposing factions. On one side sat Igor Volkov, a notorious lieutenant of the Russian syndicate operating out of Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. Volkov was an older alpha, his scent thick with cheap cigars and old blood. Across from him sat Roman Gallagher. Even through the fog of his suppressants, Roman's presence hit Leo like a physical blow. The alpha was the undisputed head of the Gallagher crime family, a man whose ruthlessness was legendary. Roman was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to his broad shoulders. His pheromones were completely controlled, yet they leaked into the room with a terrifying subtlety, the scent of ozone right before a lightning strike mixed with crushed cedar. Sitting directly beside Roman was his translator, a sweating beta named Thomas Aris. Thomas was known in the underworld as a neutral party, a man who brokered conversations between empires. "Refill the glasses," the maitre d' had whispered to Leo a few minutes earlier, shoving a $2,000 bottle of Bordeaux into his hands. "Do not look them in the eye. Do not speak. If you drop so much as a napkin, you are fired." Stepping into the room, Leo kept his gaze lowered, his movements fluid and silent. He approached the table just as Volkov leaned forward, his heavy, scarred hands resting on the polished oak. Volkov spoke in rapid, guttural Russian. Leo's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around the neck of the wine bottle. He didn't just understand Russian, he was fluent. His grandmother, a hardened immigrant who fled St. Petersburg in the 80s, had raised him on the language demanding perfection. "The docks are compromised," Volkov said in his native tongue, his tone grave eyes darting to the shadows of the room. "My inside man at the CPD tipped me off. The feds have heavily armed tactical units waiting at Pier 39 tonight. It is a sting operation. If your men go to collect the weapons, they will be slaughtered, and the trail will lead back to us. We must abort." Leo approached Thomas's side of the table, carefully pouring the dark red liquid into the crystal glass. He waited for the beta to translate the dire warning. Thomas cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. His heart rate was visibly elevated, a bead of sweat tracing the line of his jaw. When he spoke to Roman, his voice was smooth, practiced, and entirely deceptive. "Mr. Volkov says the docks are completely secure." Thomas translated in English, not missing a beat. "The shipment has arrived exactly as planned at Pier 39. He insists that you send your best men tonight to collect the weapons as the harbor patrol has been paid off and the window of opportunity is closing. Leo froze. The pour of the wine halted, hovering a fraction of an inch above the rim of the glass. His mind raced a cold spike of adrenaline piercing through the dull ache of his suppressants. He's lying. Thomas was completely altering the message. Volkov was trying to warn Roman of a federal trap, trying to save both their families from a catastrophic bust. Thomas Roman's supposedly loyal translator was deliberately sending the Gallagher family's top enforcers into a massacre. Roman's jaw tightened. The Alpha leaned back in his leather chair, swirling the wine Leo had just poured. The ozone scent in the room spiked, growing sharper, more oppressive. "Is that so?" Roman murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Leo's spine. "He's certain there's no law enforcement presence?" Thomas turned to Volkov, speaking in jagged, broken Russian. He asks if the weapons are of the highest quality. Volkov frowned, clearly confused by the seemingly irrelevant question given the context of a federal raid. "Yes, of course, but that does not matter right now. Did you tell him about the raid? If he sends his men to the pier, it is over for all of us." Thomas turned back to Roman with a placid smile. "He assures you the quality is exceptional. He says it is perfectly safe to proceed tonight." Leo felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a simple miscommunication. This was an assassination attempt by proxy. Someone had bought Thomas Aris. If Roman agreed to this deal, the Gallagher family would be decimated by morning, and Roman himself would likely face life in a maximum security federal penitentiary, or worse, a bullet from a rival who orchestrated the sting. Roman nodded slowly, reaching into his jacket to pull out a silver lighter. "Tell him I appreciate his diligence. I'll dispatch my crew to Pier 39 at midnight." Leo's breath hitched. He had to leave. His job was to pour the wine and vanish into the wallpaper. He was an Omega, a lowly waiter, drowning in medical debt, existing in a world that would swat him out of existence without a second thought. If he interfered with a Mafia negotiation, he wouldn't just be fired. He would be buried in the foundation of a new high-rise on Wacker Drive. Walk away, his survival instinct screamed. Walk away, Leo. But as he took a step back, Roman's gaze flicked up, meeting Leo's eyes for a fraction of a second. It was an accidental collision of sight, but in that microsecond, Leo saw the heavy burden resting on the Alpha's shoulders. He felt the terrifying magnetic pull of Roman's dormant pheromones. It was an instinct older than logic, a biological imperative that demanded he protect the pack leader from a threat he could not see. Thomas was signing Roman's death warrant with a smile. Leo's hands shook. He stepped forward again, moving toward Roman's side of the table under the guise of refilling the Alpha's water glass. The room felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. Every step felt like walking to his own execution. The clinking of silverware and the soft, ambient jazz filtering through the suite's hidden speakers felt deafeningly loud. Leo's hands were remarkably steady as he lifted the heavy crystal pitcher, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He positioned himself carefully at Roman Gallagher's right shoulder, effectively wedging his body between the imposing Alpha and the traitorous translator. The proximity to Roman was overwhelming. Without the barrier of distance, the Alpha's scent was intoxicating, clean, dangerous, and incredibly dominant. Leo's suppressed biology flared in panic and submission, his inner Omega warring with his rational mind. He could feel a faint sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Roman ignored him, his cold, piercing eyes locked on Volkov. "Tell Volkov we have a deal," Roman instructed Thomas, his voice carrying the finality of a judge passing a sentence. As Thomas opened his mouth to translate the fatal agreement, Leo made his move. He tilted the pitcher, allowing a stream of ice water to fill Roman's glass. He leaned in, dipping his head, as if to ensure he didn't spill a drop on the expensive tablecloth. His lips were mere inches from Roman's ear. "Your translator is lying," Leo whispered, his voice so soft it was barely a breath of air against the Alpha's skin. Roman's entire body went rigid. The reaction was microscopic, a sudden stillness, a slight cessation of breath, but to an Omega, sensitive to Alpha physiology, it was as loud as a gunshot. Leo didn't pull away immediately. He poured the water, forcing the words out in a rapid, terrifying stream. "Volkov said the docks are a trap, a federal sting. Thomas is sending your men to die." Having delivered the explosive truth, Leo straightened up immediately. He locked his jaw, his expression a blank, professional mask, as he pulled a white linen napkin from his forearm to dab a non-existent drop of water from the table. The silence that followed stretched into an eternity. Roman did not look at him. The Alpha's expression remained entirely impassive, a masterclass in emotional control. But the air in the room fundamentally changed. The scent of ozone deepened, darkening into something sharp, acrid, and utterly lethal. Roman's pheromones were spiking, flooding the room with the scent of an apex predator that had just realized there was a snake in its den. Volkov shifted uncomfortably in his seat, rubbing his chest. Even across the table, the older Russian Alpha could feel the sudden, crushing weight of Roman's aura. Thomas the Beta lacked the biological sensitivity to fully grasp the shift, but he clearly noticed the sudden tension. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Is everything all right, Mr. Gallagher?" Thomas asked, his voice wavering slightly. Leo stood frozen by the wall, the silver tray pressed against his stomach like a futile shield. "He's going to kill me!" Leo thought panic threatening to break through his suppressants. "He's going to think I'm part of the setup, or that I'm lying to protect the Russians." Roman slowly turned his head, his dark, calculating eyes sweeping over Leo. The gaze was heavy, dissecting. It stripped away the uniform, the false calmness peering straight into the terrified Omega beneath. Roman inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. Despite the heavy suppressants, Roman was trying to catch his scent, trying to read the biochemical truth of Leo's fear. Then Roman turned his attention back to Thomas. He smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow expression. "Everything is perfectly fine, Thomas," Roman said smoothly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers. "But before we finalize the logistics, ask Volkov a question for me. Ask him exactly how many federal agents are waiting at the pier." Thomas swallowed hard. The color drained from the Beta's face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. I'm sorry, mister. Gallagher federal agents. You heard me," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with lethal intent. "Ask him." Thomas's hands began to shake. He looked at Volkov, then back to Roman, realizing he was caught in a trap he couldn't talk his way out of. If he translated the question accurately, Volkov would confirm the raid proving Thomas had lied moments ago. If he made up a lie, Roman would know immediately. "Mr. Gallagher, I believe there has been a misunderstanding," Thomas stammered, pulling at his collar. "Volkov didn't mention any feds." "What is he saying?" Volkov demanded in Russian, sensing the panic, his hand reaching instinctually beneath his jacket toward his holster. "Tell him to keep his hands on the table," Roman snapped at Thomas before casually reaching into his own suit jacket. He didn't pull out a lighter this time. He pulled out a sleek, suppressed Sig Sauer P226, resting the heavy black metal on the linen tablecloth, the barrel pointed directly at Thomas's chest. Leo gasped, stumbling backward, until his spine hit the velvet-flocked wall. "You have 10 seconds, Thomas." Roman whispered, the deadly calm of his demeanor far more terrifying than any shouting. "Tell me who paid you to set up my men, or you won't leave this room alive." Chaos erupted. Volkov, realizing the deal had violently imploded, drew his own weapon, pointing it at Roman. Roman's bodyguards stationed outside the heavy mahogany doors must have heard the commotion or sensed the violent spike in their boss's pheromones, because the doors burst open. 4 massive Alpha enforcers flooded the VIP suite weapons' drawn laser sights, cutting through the dim lighting. "Nobody moves!" one of the enforcers roared. Thomas fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands raised in the air. "It was the Moretti family they paid me. They knew about the raid. They wanted you to send your crew, so your territory would be defenseless." Roman didn't blink. He kept his gun leveled. He had his answer. But amidst the screaming, the drawn weapons, and the thick, suffocating stench of fear and aggression filling the room, Roman's gaze shifted. He looked past the weeping traitor, past the angry Russian mobster, and locked eyes entirely on the pale, trembling waiter pressed against the far wall. "Secure the room!" Roman ordered his men, his voice slicing through the noise. "Tie up the translator. Disarm the Russian." He slowly stood from his chair, holstering his weapon, his eyes never leaving Leo. "And bring the Omega to me." Adrenaline turned Leo's blood to ice as 2 of Gallagher's enforcers, both towering alphas, reeking of burnt rubber and stale coffee, flanked his sides. They didn't drag him. Their grip was firm but surprisingly restrained, a stark contrast to the brutal subjugation of Thomas and Volkov, echoing against the mahogany walls of the VIP suite. "Keep moving," the taller enforcer grunted, guiding Leo out through a hidden service corridor that bypassed the crowded main dining room of the Obsidian Room. Outside, the Chicago storm was raging, whipping freezing rain off Lake Michigan. A fleet of sleek, bulletproof Cadillac Escalades idled in the alleyway. Leo was pushed gently into the back of the lead vehicle. The doors slammed shut, sealing him in a soundproof, leather-scented cocoon. A moment later, the opposite door opened, and Roman Gallagher slid into the seat beside him. The proximity was immediately suffocating. Roman had discarded his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt to reveal forearms corded with muscle and intricate dark ink. In the confined space of the SUV, the Alpha's pheromones were completely unmasked. The scent of ozone and crushed cedar washed over Leo, aggressively dominating his senses. Leo's inner Omega, suppressed for years beneath heavy pharmaceuticals, shivered in a terrifying mixture of deep biological submission and undeniable attraction. "Take us to the Lakeshore penthouse." Roman ordered the driver, his voice low and commanding. The convoy surged forward, melting into the rain-slicked city streets. For 10 minutes, absolute silence dominated the vehicle. Leo stared out the tinted window, watching the blur of the magnificent mile go by his heart, hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was acutely aware of Roman's gaze, tracing the line of his jaw, his neck, and the erratic pulse jumping at his collarbone. "What is your name?" Roman finally asked. "Leo," he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Leo Collins." Roman leaned back against the headrest, studying the trembling waiter. "You saved my life tonight, Leo Collins, and the lives of 20 of my best men. But what I want to know is how an Omega waiter at a Gold Coast steakhouse speaks fluent, idiomatic Russian, and why you decided to risk a bullet to your head to intervene in a Mafia dispute." Leo swallowed hard, his throat dry. "My grandmother. She fled St. Petersburg. She refused to let me speak English in the house, growing up. And I didn't plan to intervene. But I saw what Thomas was doing. I saw him smiling while he sent your people to a slaughter. Leo finally turned to look at Roman, his hazel eyes wide and desperate. "I couldn't just pour the water and watch you walk into a grave, Mr. Gallagher, even if it cost me my job." Roman let out a dark, breathless chuckle. "Your job is the least of your concerns right now. Those suppressants you're taking, they're cheap, illegal, and they're failing. I can smell your panic, Leo. I can smell you." Leo flinched instinctively, bringing a hand up to cover the scent gland on his neck. "I can't afford the prescription ones," he confessed the bitter truth, slipping out before he could stop it. "The property taxes on my family's house in Cook County are burying me. If I don't work in high-end venues, I lose the house. If I don't take the pills, the venues won't hire an unbonded Omega. It's survival." Roman's expression shifted, the cold, calculating mask of the Mafia boss fracturing for a fraction of a second to reveal a flash of intense, primal possessiveness. In the underworld, Omegas were often treated as fragile commodities, heavily guarded and pampered, but fiercely controlled. Seeing one fighting a solitary, desperate war for survival triggered a deeply ingrained protective instinct in the Alpha's biology. "You aren't taking those pills ever again." Roman stated the command, leaving no room for argument. "As of tonight, your debts are cleared. Your taxes are paid. But in exchange, you work directly for me." Before Leo could process the monumental shift in his reality, Roman reached into his pocket and produced Thomas's encrypted smartphone. The screen was cracked from where Roman had thrown the traitor to the floor. "Thomas is currently being questioned," Roman said, his tone chillingly casual. "But this is his burner phone. My tech guys unlocked it, but all of his correspondence with the Moretti family is coded in a Russian cipher likely to throw off our local rivals. Since you understand the nuances of the language, you're going to translate every single message. I need to know exactly how deep this betrayal goes." The SUV descended into a heavily fortified underground parking garage beneath a towering glass skyscraper. The transition from a desperate waiter to a Mafia translator was dizzying, but as Leo looked at the encrypted text messages on the screen, a chilling realization washed over him. "Mr. Gallagher." Leo breathed his eyes, scanning the Cyrillic text. "This isn't just about the docks. The sting at Pier 39 was a distraction." Roman paused his hand halfway to the door handle. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas sent a message 10 minutes before the meeting started." Leo translated rapidly, his voice shaking. "It says the bait is set. Gallagher will send his muscle to the pier at midnight. The Lakeshore penthouse will be unguarded. Move the strike team at 12:15 a.m. Burn it all." Roman's eyes widened, the scent of ozone, violently spiking, smelling like a live electrical wire. The docks weren't the target. Roman was the target, and they had just driven straight into the kill zone. "Driver reverse! Get us out of here!" Roman roared, but his command came 3 seconds too late. The heavy steel security gate of the underground garage suddenly slammed shut, locking the convoy inside. The screeching of tires echoed off the concrete pillars as 2 unmarked black vans sped out from the shadows of the lower levels, aggressively ramming into the front and rear escalades of Gallagher's escort. Deafening gunfire erupted instantly. The sound of automatic weapons tearing through metal and reinforced glass was terrifying. Sparks rained down as bullets ricocheted off the concrete ceiling. "Get down!" Roman shouted, physically grabbing Leo and throwing him onto the floorboards of the SUV. The heavy Alpha covered Leo's body with his own, pressing the Omega into the thick carpeting. "We're boxed in, boss." The driver yelled over the chaos, drawing his own weapon and firing blindly through the cracked windshield. A second later, the driver's side window shattered completely, and the driver slumped forward over the steering wheel. "Damn it!" Roman snarled. He rolled off Leo, kicking his door open. He turned back, his dark eyes blazing with a feral, terrifying light. "Stay exactly where you are, Leo. Do not move. I will handle this." Roman stepped out into the chaotic crossfire, his suppressed Sig Sauer already drawn and firing with lethal precision. Leo curled into a tight ball, his hands clamped over his ears, sobbing in absolute terror. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed violently with the heavy aggressive pheromones of battling alphas. The garage had turned into a slaughterhouse. Minutes stretched into an eternity of noise and violence. Leo peeked over the edge of the leather seat. He saw Roman moving with terrifying efficiency, taking down 2 heavily armed Moretti hitmen who had tried to flank the SUV. But the Gallagher men were outnumbered, caught entirely off guard by the ambush meant for Roman's sanctuary. Then, through the smoke, Leo saw a shadow moving behind a concrete pillar. A sniper dressed in tactical gear was taking deliberate aim at Roman's back while the Alpha was reloading. Roman couldn't see him. The crossfire was too loud, the smoke too thick. Leo didn't think. The suppressants in his system were entirely overwhelmed by his biological drive to protect his Alpha. It wasn't logic. It was pure, unadulterated instinct. Roman behind the pillar. Leo screamed at the top of his lungs, throwing his body against the open passenger door to make himself heard. Roman spun instantly, dropping to one knee as a bullet tore through the air precisely where his chest had been a fraction of a second before. Without hesitating, Roman fired twice, hitting the sniper dead in the chest. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Sirens began to wail in the distance. The Chicago Police Department had finally been alerted to the war zone beneath the luxury high-rise. Roman's remaining men quickly secured the perimeter, checking the bodies of the fallen Moretti hitmen. Roman, breathing heavily, holstered his weapon. His suit shirt was stained with blood, none of it his own, and his knuckles were raw. He walked slowly back to the SUV, his eyes locking onto Leo, who was still trembling by the open door. The Alpha reached out his large, blood-stained hands, gently grasping Leo's face. The touch was shocking, not violent, but intensely grounding. Roman's thumbs stroked the Omega's cheekbones, wiping away a stray tear. "You saved my life again." Roman whispered, his voice incredibly soft, despite the carnage surrounding them. The scent of ozone was fading, replaced by the deep, rich aroma of cedar that felt like a warm, heavy blanket over Leo's frayed nerves. "You are reckless, Leo. You should have stayed down." I couldn't let him shoot you." Leo choked out, leaning involuntarily into the Alpha's touch, his body craving the soothing pheromones. "No, you couldn't, because you belong to my pack now," Roman declared, his eyes flashing with a possessive intensity that sealed Leo's fate. "The Moretti family just declared an all-out war. The city is going to burn for this, and you are going to be right by my side through all of it." Leo looked into the dark, relentless eyes of the Mafia boss. He had walked into his shift as a desperate, invisible waiter, drowning in debt. Now he was the linchpin in a violent underworld war, bound to the most dangerous Alpha in Chicago. Roman pulled him out of the ruined SUV, tucking Leo firmly against his side, as his men escorted them toward the private secured elevator. "Welcome to the family, Leo," Roman murmured against his hair. The doors closed, leaving the bloodshed behind, but Leo knew the real war had just begun. That wraps up the explosive story of Leo and Roman. From a high-stakes dinner to a deadly underground shootout, Leo has traded his apron for a dangerous place at the side of Chicago's most lethal Alpha boss. Will Leo survive the coming mob war? And will their sudden, intense bond become something more? If you loved this gripping Omegaverse Mafia tale, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your fellow BL fans. Stay tuned for more dramatic stories.